Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our event today, Colorado Water and Real Estate 2020, a year in review. My name is Peter Bland, and I work with WestWater Research. I just wanted to go over a few bookkeeping items before we begin our event. You'll see in the top right, there's a chat tab. Throughout the presentations, you can write down questions you might have for our presenters and questions you might generally have. And we'll go over those questions during a Q&A period at the end of the event. You'll see a polls section, and it's a very simple poll. We're just curious where y'all come from, and so we can kind of craft the presentation and feedback to who all is here. And then lastly, you'll see a handouts section, which is a few presentations we prepared for y'all today with some interesting data about the real estate market trends and water market trends in Colorado. We're very happy to share those with you. Yeah, and with that, I'll pass it along to Brett.
Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. It's another beautiful day on the Front Range, and I'll say that Colorado Front Range continues to be a pretty attractive place for people to put down roots and come to. So what we found, and I think you'll hear some data on this today, is the existing housing stock is just not keeping up, and there's continued demand for new home construction across a range of price points and locations in northern Colorado. And the year of COVID seems to have only exacerbated this demand. This is sort of interesting that I'm interested to hear about this as well from Kelly today. So there's a lot of, there's this demand for housing that continues to sort of put pressure on northern Colorado. And while there are a lot of hurdles to overcome in developing new housing projects, water has emerged as a particularly difficult one, even for seasoned land developers. So these hurdles are somewhat new. I'm looking back, a lot of the growth and development we've seen in northern Colorado over the past 20 plus years has really been made possible by something known as the Colorado Big Thompson Project. And that's most visible as Carter Lake and Horsetooth Reservoir on the Front Range here. But from a water standpoint, that more than anything has really allowed our northern Colorado communities to grow. But the CBT project's kind of coming to the end of its road in many ways. And looking to the future, there's all sorts of different directions communities are going and may need to go with regard to water to supply the growth that's anticipated. So today, there's always been a nexus between Front Range water issues and Front Range real estate. So the Front Range water market is and has for a long time been driven by land development and real estate activity. And similarly, real estate development, housing development has often been driven by access to water rights. And so there's always been that nexus. And the last few years have kind of shown us that this nexus is only likely to be strengthened, that water professionals are going to benefit from having an understanding of real estate, and real estate professionals are going to benefit from having an understanding of water. And so we felt this webinar was maybe a timely thing to put together and to provide some information. So our hope today is that you'll basically leave with a better understanding of the sector that you're less familiar with. So those in the real estate sector have a little bit better understanding of water, and those in the water sector have a better understanding of the real estate market, because our feeling is that there's such a significant relationship there. So with that introduction, I'll just introduce Kelly. She's got about 30 years of experience, I think, in Front Range Northern Colorado real estate, and a great track record. I think she was nominated as Realtor of the Year a couple years ago for the Boulder area, and she's going to provide a sort of a 101 or a recap of the Northern Colorado housing market.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so to be fair, I won Realtor of the Year. I wasn't actually just nominated, so I'm proud of that. Anyway, thank you so much. I am a realtor with RE/MAX, and I have been for about 30 years. but I'm also the media spokesperson for the Colorado Association of Realtors. So what I do is I accumulate all the stats for all 13 MLSs that we have in the state of Colorado and make sure that all the realtors have the statistics that they need to understand their market and better serve their clients. So I'm really, really excited to be with you today because I've never really spoken to a bunch of water people. I wish you were all here in person so I could see what water people look like. But either way, I'm here to kind of give you a picture of the way that the real estate market is going right now. And as just a quick overview, I think we were all caught a little bit by surprise over this last year how the pandemic actually gave literally a boost to our real estate market where we all expected the opposite to happen. And so watching it unfold after April, May, June has been really surprising. And even here in January, we are faced with an unbelievable seller's market with very low inventory and very high demand and migration from all over the country into Colorado that is something that we didn't anticipate. And so it's been an interesting lesson to learn a little bit about how this all affected our market. So let's take a quick look. I'll try to give you some overviews. If you have any questions, let me know. I'll get you my screen so that you can see it. Just a moment. All right. So just taking a quick picture of Colorado as a whole, which I do recognize that most of you are looking at the northern Colorado sector, but just so you can get a feel for the way things are looking as a state. I highlighted some of the data that I think is most important, which is listings are down, and this is going to become a broken record for you in the next couple minutes, and sales are up. So when we have 10.2% pending sales and less than 3% new listings, you can clearly see that the buyers out there are buying up all of the properties that are available to them. And because of that, the housing prices on an average for the whole state have gone up about 8.7%, which I must say is particularly high for the entire state. So we've seen those kind of numbers in Boulder and Denver and the Front Range in general often in the last 5 years. But we haven't seen those numbers in Grand Junction or some of our El Paso County or some of the more remote areas of our state, which are actually experiencing just as much appreciation as we are seeing on the Front Range, which is why I thought it would be interesting to share it for you. So focusing a little bit more on the local, I know that you're kind of looking more at the northern Colorado area, so we're going to take Larimer, and Boulder counties and take a look at what some of their statistics look like too. So, and they're going to look very similar. Weld County is down, almost about 3% in number of listings for sale. And once again, their sold listings outnumber the listings that are coming on the market. So we're just not keeping pace with the properties that are on the market for the demand that is out there for those homes. The other area that I noted that I think is a huge number that's very important is to see, this is what we call the absorption rate, the months of supply of inventory. And so this number shows us that right now we're at 1 month in Weld County of inventory. So if no one listed a home for sale or no home builder was able to provide a new home for someone to purchase, in 1 month, we would literally run out of houses to show. There would not be a single house out there to see. So that is unbelievable. A balanced market is 5 to 7 months of inventory, and we are at 1 in Weld County. So I think the takeaway from that is that we're not keeping up with the demand in Weld County at this point. And I told you it's going to be a little bit of a broken record here, but let's look at Larimer County. So Larimer looks very similar. The prices haven't gone up quite as much, but the same pattern is happening here. They're down in their listings from this time last year, but they're up in their sold listings from this time last year, and prices are up almost 5%. So once again, they have the same type of pattern, and their months of supply of inventory is less than 1, so 0.8 of a month. So it's a couple weeks, 3 weeks. There's 3 weeks of inventory available in Larimer County. So if you're a builder and you're trying to decide where to build, Weld and Larimer County are sure looking good, because there's clearly not enough supply for the demand in these areas. And do take a note at the bottom of each of these, we talk about townhouse and condos, and not to ignore them, their numbers are very similar. So a lot of times people assume that townhomes and condos do not keep up pace with single family homes in terms of their performance or appreciation year over year. In this case, townhomes and condos are doing just as well, and their numbers are looking very, very similar to single family homes. They're taking a look at Boulder County, and I added this because it's a northern Colorado area, although I do recognize that there is not a lot of new construction happening in Boulder County for a lot of reasons, growth limitations, et cetera, permits not allowed and available, land that's not accessible or available or too expensive. So I recognize that, but taking a look at Boulder County, just so you can see what it looks like, a very similar picture. Listings are down, sold listings are up, and the median sales price has gone up 5%, which is a kind of a nice, healthy percentage as opposed to something too crazy, which I'm happy to see, that things are sort of holding their own in Boulder County and not going a little crazy. But once again, less than a month of inventory available for buyers to see. Condos and townhomes do mirror the single family home statistics. So if we're going to look specifically at new home construction, that is what the next several slides are for. So these are specific to new home constructions. They do not include resales. And this is a graph of the front range annual starts for the third quarter of 19 versus the third quarter of 20. And I've highlighted Weld County, which you can see actually the annual starts were down from 2019. But take a look at Larimer County. Their annual starts were up by 21%. So Larimer County seems to be the place where the building's happening. Weld County needs to have more. There's no question about that. Larimer County seems to be addressing the issue, but still not enough. And Boulder is way down and not addressing the issue. I'm not even sure that they can. But it does kind of show you at least what the counties are doing in terms of where the building has occurred between 2019 and 2020. So this graph I find is interesting just for a couple reasons. It shows the annual starts between condominiums versus townhomes versus detached single family homes. So if you're a builder and you're trying to decide what to build, you get a parcel of land and you figure out your water and you try to determine what you're going to build on it. I think what's interesting about this is if you look at 2019, there were 59 condominium complexes started during that quarter. But in 2020, same quarter, there were 0. Instead, the builders all moved to townhomes and duplexes and single family homes. And I'll talk about it in a few minutes, but the townhome duplex paired home product seems to be a more popular product. And I think this graph really shows that people are moving away from the condo buildings and moving more into a duplex townhome product instead of the condo. And you can also, you can see that on the stats here down below. So if builders are looking at what to build, this is a good indication of where the popularity would lie in terms of the type of property that people are looking to buy. So I think this one is interesting because if you're wondering, well, the houses that are being built, what price ranges are working and what price ranges are the building in. And I think you're going to see, if you take a look at Weld County, and this goes back, gosh, I think it goes back 2019 and 20, looking at third quarter. It's showing you that the starts and what they're building, that most of them are in the sweet spot, which is what I would call $400,000 to $500,000. The sweet spot is on fire right now, 4 to 5. And in Larimer County, it's the same exact thing. If you take a look, you'll see that all the other price points are down for lots of reasons. And the 4 to 500 is what is the most popular building price sector for those two counties. And those are the ones that are the most successful in their sales. But to build houses, unfortunately, you need ground and you need a lot. And it is very hard to find vacant land, which has been some of our developers' biggest challenges. And I'm sure the water goes hand in hand with that, land that has water available. I'm sure those two things are a big deal. So if you take a look at Larimer County on the left side, you can see that the blue lines are the inventory of vacant developed lots, and the black line is the months of supply. So as the inventory goes down and down and down, you can see the months of supply go down and down and down too. So not unlike sales and residential sales in the graph I showed you a little bit ago, the months of supply is not keeping up with what developers and builders are looking for in terms of vacant developed lots for sale. And the same holds true for Weld County. You can see that line dips well underneath what the inventory is and the months of supply, meaning that they are gobbled up as fast as those lots become available, they are sold. And finally, this map is, I think, particularly telling for lots of reasons. And when we share all of this information with you online, you will have PDFs of this information, and I think you'll be able to see the copy on here a little bit better because I know it's small right now. But it's a really nice way to see what's happening up and down the northern Colorado corridor. And it starts up here in Wellington and moves its way through Fort Collins, Loveland, Berthoud, down through Firestone, Frederick, and Lafayette. And what's interesting about this, I think, is it shows you in each box the number of new construction starts in each area, but it also shows you the price points. And on the left, you'll see that areas that are the west of I-25 are most expensive. And you'll see that the price points are higher than those in the blue on the east side of I-25. Greeley happens to be particularly affordable, and you can really get some great new construction out there between 3 and 4, but that is almost impossible to find on the west side of I-25. So the truly I-25 ends up being this railroad tracks right down the middle. And a lot of people are really loving buying houses in Johnstown, and Windsor is actually particularly popular right now for our older communities and people who want to downsize into some beautiful patio home communities. Windsor has those, along with Johnstown, Frederick, Firestone. So don't think that those are not popular areas just because the pricing is low. I think the land is more affordable, and builders are able to build a more affordable product. And those areas are on fire right now. So they are really selling quickly because they're in, fairly close vicinity to everything that people need, and they have nice, affordable new product. So, and then of course, you'll get down into the purple on the left as you get closer and closer to Boulder, the prices go up and up and up and make it less affordable for builders to be able to hang on to that. So I hope that helps, and feel free to let me know what questions you have about the slides. I have stopped sharing, but I don't see anymore. Just a moment.
Thanks, Kelly. That was great. And yeah, if there are questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll try to get to them.
Yeah.
Towards the end of the webinar.
Just a couple more comments now. I can see you all.
Sure.
So a few other things to add is that when we talk about migration, these are the places where people are coming from. For the most part, California is it, and not Southern California, but Northern California. So LA and San Francisco, huge, tons of people coming from those areas right now. We're also seeing Texas, Chicago, not all of Illinois, but Chicago and New York are the areas where most people are coming from. The migration is big coming into Colorado right now. We do have a lot of people from Colorado leaving for Montana. Montana and Idaho are the most popular, but they're not leaving as fast as they're coming. They're coming a lot faster than that. I had a chance to listen to Elliot Eisenberg the other day. He's the chief economist for the National Association of Realtors. And he made a couple comments that I thought might interest you. He specifically said, I quote, "The smaller the city, the bigger the recovery." And what he meant was that the cities, and he was specifically speaking to Colorado. So the cities that are the smaller towns, Windsor, Johnstown, Frederick, Firestone, Tinmouth, all of those areas, people are flocking to the smaller city concept right now. So if I were a builder and I could find water, those would be the areas I would look to make my new neighborhoods. However, that being said, he also said that people are specifically looking for master plan communities. So the neighborhoods that are just sort of out in the middle of the field and nothing else around them are not pulling in a lot of buyers. And I can speak to that personally. I can see that every day. But the master plan communities that incorporate some kind of commercial, some type of multifamily mixed with housing, mixed with some arts and culture, parks and trails, golf courses, pools, those type of things, those are incredibly popular right now. And he just thought that the Northern Colorado corridor was getting ready to burst. The challenge is that we don't have enough construction to deal with the demand. So the inventory, as you saw, is already at remarkable lows that we've really never experienced before. And the demand is incredibly high with interest rates being as low as they are. But we don't, and we have kind of an area where everybody just wants to flock to, but we don't have enough houses for them. So it drives the prices up, and lack of affordability will eventually drive people away. So it's an interesting challenge that I'll be excited to see what December 2021 looks like. And my hope is that we'll have a lot of new construction starts and houses that we are able to sell.
Thanks. It's really interesting to hear where people are coming from too. Yeah. I heard the Colorado state demographer talk about that about 2 years ago. And it's just fascinating. And not just inflow, she had data on outflow too, where people from Colorado move to. Right. And it's fascinating how, there's just this constant stream of people in and people out. And it sounds like
exactly
there's more people coming in than out these days.
More people coming in and out. And I think what happens is you get, Colorado's getting a lot of press right now. So in the U.S. News and World Report the other day, they listed Colorado as #1 in prosperity. And they defined prosperity as having a place with job opportunities, health, and growth. So if you think about it, you're in the middle of a pandemic and you live in New York City, and you're looking to see that Colorado is the #1 place in prosperity. It also was voted the #1 place for a staycation. You start reading about stuff like this and you think, well, I'm working from home. I'm going to Colorado. Why would I stay here? And on the other side, the people in Colorado who can no longer afford to live here are saying Montana's looking pretty good. It's affordable. Like, I still get, the great outdoors and all the things that I like. So it's a very interesting, it's an interesting subject, and it's interesting to watch people come and go and why they do it.
Yeah. Well, I do have some questions, but I'm going to let Walraven kind of provide some context on water, and then we'll get into a little Q&A after that. So Walraven managed Stillwater Resources for a number of years. I think he's been in the water sector for over 40 years, and He's going to provide us kind of an introductory and some data on water in northern Colorado, similar or parallel to what Kelly just provided on housing. So with that, take it away, Walraven.
Yeah, I was one of those people that came from California, although I came here for 2 years in 1979, still here. So I wanted to jump off of Kelly's presentation to focus on the interface between water and new housing, along with a lot of the other policies that Kelly talked about. Water availability and cost are really contributing to the shortage of product for the real estate marketplace. And I like to use these particular quotes. Can you see my screen okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right. Basically, the idea of touch water in the West and you touch everything is something I found in my career here. Whether you're directly or indirectly, somehow you're in the water business. If you've got a factory, if you've got a real estate development, if you're buying a house, if you're trying to protect an aquatic habitat, you're going to be in the water market, like I said, directly or indirectly. And the other is that we do have markets here. Water markets behave a lot like real estate markets, not exactly. It's real property, and it tends to find the highest value. So, Governor John Love said years ago, water does flow uphill to money. Second here. So, water markets are really balkanized. If you talk about the price of gold, the price of oil, any other commodity, you can say, well, gold is $1,800 or oil is $50. Well, here in Colorado, we have 7 major basins. Within those are dozens of sub-basins, and within each of those are specific water markets. They all behave differently. They all have different prices, different rules. And so if you were to ask me, hey, what's the cost to the water cost for a house in Colorado, I would have to say it depends. It depends on where you are, where you're developing, and what's going on. WestWater does a great job doing data, and you'll see a lot of examples of this in our presentation today. This is a heat map of where water market activity is actually happening over the last decade. And you can see it's really similar to Kelly's presentation. There's a lot of activity right here in the northern part of the state, sort of a triangle from Denver to Fort Collins to Greeley is where there's just a lot of activity going on. A little bit in El Paso County, and the one out in Otero County, I think that's a bit of a outlier. But almost all of the activity is in northern Colorado. And here's the whole statewide market. You're really looking at a market that's around $100 million a year. People talk to me, oh, you're in the water business. That's like going to be the energy business. And I say, well, look, the whole market's about $100 million a year. And if you see a 16-pad well being drilled somewhere in Weld County, that's about $100 million right there in that one spot. So that's our whole water market. So it's very different than real estate or energy, but it's important where it's important. You can see also that in the blue that the dominant part of that water market, as in that heat map, is in the northern Front Range. And a lot of that is Colorado Big Thompson, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a few seconds. So within that market, you can see that the blue here is what's called regional supplies. That's almost all Colorado Big Thompson. So Colorado Big Thompson comes into Lake Estes from the western slope. There's a tunnel under Rocky Mountain National Park. It brings in a couple 100,000 acre feet a year. And that water is distributed from Boulder all the way up to Fort Collins, Greeley, and places east of that. That water is broken up into units called CBT units, Colorado Big Thompson units. And those are freely tradable within that area. Now, you couldn't take those CBT units into Pueblo or Denver, but you can use them anywhere within the area. So if a farmer or an industry or someone has some that they want to sell, there's a ready market for it. And historically, a lot of the communities, particularly the ones Kelly was talking about along I-25, basically you came in with your CBT unit and you give the city your CBT unit, you get a building permit in exchange. And so historically, that's what happened, and that's what's driven. So really, the water market is very closely interlaced with the building market. So when building is down, water market is down. It never completely disappears, but it gets a lot worse. Let's say in 2008, 2009, we had very few transactions. Now, there's a rig diversity in prices. This is 5 ditches that are all divert within a mile of each other in Golden. And you'd say, okay, they divert from the same place. I bet the one that has the most dependable water right, the most senior water right, is the most expensive. And actually, that's not true. The ag ditch is probably the most dependable water right, but it's not. And the reason is that there's only one buyer, and so they set the price. When you start having lots of buyers into a marketplace, be it developers, builders, cities, others, environmental groups, whatever, then all of a sudden prices start to go up and water markets start to emulate other markets more. Really, the most vibrant market has been CBT, although most of that water has been accounted for now. But even within a small geographic area, you can have a tremendous variability in price depending on what's going on in that marketplace. Going back to CBT, you can see kind of what's happened historically here with the CBT prices. So back in 2010, you could buy a CBT unit for about $10,000. $10,000 towards the price of your house, that doesn't look too bad. The prices now per unit are running in the $60,000 to $70,000 range if you can find them. And that's the other problem with CBT is even if you're willing to pay the price, you may not be able to find sufficient CBT units to be able to undertake your development. And as that supply has reduced, as development has increased, the price has gone up significantly. Then you have, in any economic system, you start seeing alternatives, substitutions. And so you've seen other ditch companies come into play, and those shares have started to be sold. The parlance in northern Colorado is native water, and it's water that's from here, it's not from the western slope. And those prices have gone up, but not as dramatically as CBT. But there are other factors that go into that. What I said before about CBT is that it's already entitled. You can move it, you can buy it. 45 days later, you can take it somewhere else. Just by going through their process. With water rights, to change that from irrigation to a municipal use, you can't just do that. You have to go through a process. Most cases, you have to go to a water court. You have to file an application. You have to show what your historic use was. You have to go through a lot of steps. And that takes a couple of years. It might take 2 or 3 years to go through that. So that affects price. It also adds risk and time to the process for builders and developers. So let's dig into it from the perspective of a home buyer. So Kelly's got a buyer for this $400,000 house. It's on a pretty small lot, and let's just use half an acre foot is what it uses. And so how much is that going to cost per house? Well, that again is going to depend on where you are. If you're in an area where you're required to bring a CBT unit, it's going to cost you $60,000 to provide the water for that house. Now, if you're in an area where maybe they've got ditch company shares or they've got water that they've got an inventory that you can buy from the city, you might be looking at a third to a quarter of that price, maybe $17,000 to $20,000 a house. So where you are, what the water policies are, have a huge impact on whether there's water even available and what that water is going to cost on a per house basis. This is another cool graph that WestWater put together, map. It kind of shows, well, what happens with these different policies. Well, so if you've got these older cities, Denver, Boulder, Fort Collins, Greeley, they developed their water systems generations ago, and they've been adding to it slowly but surely. And, with that existing infrastructure, with existing water rights, you might be looking at $10,000 to $20,000 per home. Other hand, and if you're looking at the younger towns, particularly those along the I-25 corridor, you might be spending as much as $60,000 per house. So there's a wide variety of costs in addition to policies. Here's another great graphic that really shows how different these policies are. So one aspect is, how much water do I have to bring to a city for me to get a building permit on a per house basis? Well, WestWater did an analysis of 21 different water providers in northern Colorado. Got a variety of answers. Now, a third of those, approximately, were at about half an acre foot. Half an acre foot is the amount of water that that house would use for a year. But you can build the exact same house in another municipality, let's say in Brighton, and you're only needing a third of an acre foot per house. Other places, it's as much as 0.7. There's a lot of reasons for this. In some cases, it's a matter of being conservative. Maybe we don't have enough storage. We may have there's a lot of reasons for it. It may be that the city didn't do a very good job in developing water for the first increment, and they're trying to make up for it with these kinds of policies. So just with that, you can't say how much water does it take for a house in northern Colorado. It depends. Other factors are just the size of the lot, what kind of development it is, what kind of irrigation demands there are. There's all sorts of policies that you have to deal with to figure out how you're going to solve the water problem. Brett and I get calls all the time from people saying, hey, I got a really good deal on a piece of property in such and such a municipality. How much is the water going to cost? So we spend some time figuring it out, and then they'd realize, well, maybe that wasn't such a good deal after all. Water is going to be a real impact on our business plan. So finally, let's look at what a typical house is. And these numbers are just an example. It's going to change in every community. But basically, you could say for a $400,000 house, 5% of that price might be the water. If you're in those older communities that have a more developed water system. If you're one where you're having a CBT, it's now $60,000. So that $400,000 house becomes a $450,000 house overnight, just based on the availability of water and what you can and can't do. Now, a lot of municipalities, I count Firestone as one of these, has really taken a look at these policies and are looking at new ways to go ahead, looking at other water sources, looking at other ways to do it to bring that price down so that housing can be affordable. But so basically, in conclusion, water is not like other commodities. Water price varies greatly from place to place. Water policies that affect housing also there's a lot of variety within those from place to place.
Hope people thought so as well. So one question I had for Kelly that I was thinking of asking, she kind of answered, which is, if someone builds a home, is there any sort of lag, or is there trouble selling new homes? And it sounds like the answer is no.
There's no trouble selling new homes. No,
And so,
I would say though that the master plan communities are selling a lot better in terms of they're quicker. They have, they're not building any specs. They've got everything ready to go. That rather than the communities that are kind of out there by themselves. The ones that are out there by themselves do sell, they sell just fine, and they will all sell eventually. But I will say that the draw of additional services in the community seems to be important. But you're right. The demand is so strong, you could build who knows what out there in the middle of the field. People would still come if it were nice and new with gray walls and quartz counters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that does beg a question that I've wondered, which is, if demand is so strong for new homes, mm-hmm. as much as we drive I-25 and we see so much development activity, the data kind of says it's not enough, mm-hmm. that there's more demand for housing. And so I just wonder what from your view, what moderates the pace and the scale of development? Why aren't there more housing projects currently being built?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, from what I understand, the cities, the municipalities and the counties have limits on their permits. And they do that on purpose so that overgrowth doesn't happen. I mean, you have a lot of places that don't want growth, and the taxpayers have voted to not grow their particular communities, or significantly limit it. Boulder would be certainly a good example of that, but even Broomfield, Erie, Lafayette, Louisville, Longmont, I mean, a lot of areas have limitations. So from what I understand, and talking to builders, say in Erie, for example, they would just build like crazy if they could, if they were given the permits. And the city or the town of Erie is not allowing a certain number of permits. So I think you are limited by that. And then obviously your water constraints, which you guys are the experts on that, and the availability and price of vacant developed lots. I mean, from what I understand, it's very hard to find those, not right next to some oil and gas facility. That's also hard to find. And so you put all those together and the pieces of the puzzle don't really connect as many times as you'd like them to.
Mm-hmm. And for you, Even, I mean, you did touch upon the water kind of piece of moderating development. What else do you think in terms of water? Is it just cost? I guess I'll ask that. Is it just cost that moderates it from the water side, or are there other water factors besides cost that moderates new home building?
Mm-hmm.
Even being able to find it, if you don't have the water, or the water supplies that are accepted to by a city aren't available in the marketplace. All of those things also contribute to that. And it even gets bigger than that. Some cities like Fort Collins and Greeley have been looking to build new reservoirs and had really long periods of time in the permitting process. And so that becomes a constraint also. So I think there's a lot of constraints on water other than just price.
Mm-hmm. There's a couple of questions in the chat, which I'll start posing. A few are interrelated, which is basically this, mainly for Kelly, I think. What type of housing products are people looking for? And a couple sub pieces to that would be, there is a water component there. Because of the cost of water, are developers looking at sort of smaller lot, lower water use, more like a duplex or a townhome style because of the water, or not? Are they is the housing product looking a lot like what it did 10 years ago?
Yeah, no, the housing product's not looking the way it did 10 years ago. We're seeing that the most popular type of product right now is single family home or paired homes. The paired home duplex feel has been incredibly popular. I think as people, especially older people, but a lot of people are moving to more of a low maintenance type of lifestyle, sustainability, low carbon footprint. That's all been very popular lately. And so the paired home has been very popular. The patio home has also been very popular. The little detached house with no yard, or a yard that's maintained by the association, as a downsizing product for an older population. And then the single family homes on the small lots. So those are really the popular ones. What's not super popular right now are the houses on really big lots and really big houses. Although that having been said, the pandemic did spur quite a bit of interest in homes with dual studies, workout space, finished basements, places where people could do more things at home. So I do think that's a temporary thing, but I think it's going to be about 2 years of seeing people being excited about that kind of product. The master plan communities, paired homes, single family, in that 400 to 500 range, those are the sweet spots.
With working with some developers, have you seen them pay more attention to the landscaping requirements or the water side of things than they did, 10 years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the culture and the feeling changes regarding use of that type of commodity. And over time, you'll see the temperature change about that. Plus, we have to be cognizant of the millennials, the 30-year-old-ish people who are purchasing right now and what matters to them. And that kind of thing doesn't matter to them. So builders who are dealing with that regarding landscaping and water are going to be more popular with that group. And that is a big group right now that are buying houses.
So another question came in, which I think is an interesting one. Maybe I might pose it to Walraven first, which is, like we said, we're kind of at the end of the line with CBT, and it has fueled a lot of historical development along the Front Range of Colorado. And then we've also got a pretty onerous ditch company water right process, regulatory process, to turn agricultural rights into something the municipal sector uses. So looking at those two, the question is, what does the future look like? Like, what are home builders, going to do, or municipal utilities going to do with one option kind of not being available and the other continuing to get more and more difficult to work through?
Well, I think it's a good question. What we've seen in our business is that people who are buying water that we work with are looking for things that have more certainty, that may have already been changed through water court, those sorts of things, so that all of these institutional hurdles, really become another hurdle to developing water. And there's a lot of talk of using alternative transfer mechanisms to doing sort of sharing operations. I know, Brett, you've done a lot of those in other states. There's not been too many examples of that here just because the institutional barriers are high. I think there's a lot of desire to do those things. But ultimately, you're really going to be taking water from agriculture and putting it to use for municipal use. Now, the good news is about 85% of the water in Colorado belongs to agriculture. And so you could significantly increase our population. But we also need to look at things like water conservation. We need to look at being more wise about the resources we have to make them stretch longer. And I think that reflects in some of the policies that we looked at in one of the slides, where some communities are asking for a lot less water per house than others. So I think there's a variety of things that are going to be happening in the future.
I share that viewpoint that the road forward is less simple than it was looking backward, where you bring your CBT unit and like you said, you get the permit. It looks a lot more like we've got to manage demand. We've got to look at creative supplies, maybe even leasing supplies for a period of time. So yeah, I think all probably the correct thing is all the above, whatever you can get. Kelly, you did touch upon this, the sort of the effect of COVID. Maybe you just want to spend a minute or two talking about how COVID has really driven people to Colorado and maybe these smaller communities that maybe with absent COVID, they wouldn't have seen such strong growth.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just floored. I mean, we were last time in January of this, of 2020, this time last year, I should say. We were cruising along just like normal beginning of the year stuff, and it looked like we were headed for a good spring, and everything looked like it was kind of right on track. And without the Broncos in the playoffs and without crazy weather, we were selling houses in January and February. We're looking good. And then everything just came to a halt. And with the lockdown, March and April, end of March into April, we were not allowed to show houses, and we couldn't sell a thing. And I think the entire real estate community thought we're done. Like, this is the beginning of the end for the whole year. We're at about a 10-year cycle right now. Actually, we're a little over our kind of typical 10-year cycle. And all of us thought, we're about to this is just going to plunge us right down into that 10-year cycle where we're going to see prices fall and inventory rise and demand deplete. And that was really what we would have thought in March and April of this year. Then May 9th, and I remember the date very well, we were able to show houses again. And starting on the morning of May 9th, it's like the train left the station and it never turned back. The pent up demand of what was about to happen in the spring just came flooding out into the summer and the fall. And then as I think people started to learn that their home was really important to them. So before, people would sleep at home, drive to work, stay there all day. And home was important, but for a lot of people, it was kind of a place to hang your hat. Well, home became suddenly everything. Where you raise your kids, where they go to school, where you go to school, where you exercise, where you cook, where you do everything. And so people started to get sort of an unrest about where they are, they just actually really needed something different. And with the interest rates being as low as they were, and showings being able to happen again with certain restrictions, we've just been, from May 9th to right this minute, have been absolutely crazy. And you add that with all the people migrating here from other places who are unhappy where they were living and thought Colorado would be a lovely place to be. And it's just totally different than we thought it would be. So that is how COVID affected us. It put a shot in the arm of a market that was probably about to cycle into its downtime, or at least into a plateau, a slowing off. That's where we were headed. And instead, it just pushed us right out of it.
People on the call, please continue to ask questions. I'll try to get through as many as I can. There was a question about interstate leasing and selling of water. I'll just quickly say that's not allowed. So Colorado has the rights and resources it has, and those are pretty set. I mean, there's always things that can change, but we kind of have what we have, and we're working with it. And with that, I guess a question maybe for Laura even on water is the Denver metro area, especially South Denver, has been using groundwater for a long time. They have a Denver Basin aquifer down there that they've been really reliant on to grow and develop. In northern Colorado, sort of the focus of this webinar, we have sort of a different historical use of groundwater. And by that, I mean, not much. We've been really reliant on surface water supplies. And from a groundwater standpoint, whether it's sort of shallow groundwater near the rivers or deep groundwater in bedrock aquifers, do you think groundwater is something that we can look to at all?
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of groundwater. Like anything else, there's lots of different kinds. But I think, for a lot of reasons, groundwater does interface with surface water for the most part in northern Colorado. There are some bedrock aquifers, but you have to look at those as a mining situation where once the water's gone, it's gone. And so any kind of shallow groundwater, needs to be augmented. So basically, you need to bring surface water to make that up. But that said, there's lots of opportunities with groundwater in designated basins. There's opportunities to manage groundwater with aquifer storage and recovery, where we basically use an aquifer as a place to store water. So I think that groundwater will be important as an interface. And in fact, the city of Greeley is undertaking a massive underground storage project in the Wellington area now that'll replace the surface water reservoir they were intending on building. So I think groundwater is going to be a very important aspect of future development for sure.
I don't know if this will have a good response or no, but I guess a question for both of you in kind of your respective fields. There are some questions about the future. So will housing demand keep this up, or are we headed for foreclosures, similar to 2008? What will interest rate changes do to housing? But rather, please respond to that if you have a thought on those specific questions. But I guess more broadly, looking to the future, I mean, do we have a healthy housing market? And do we have a healthy water market to support that housing market in northern Colorado? Or are there serious ailments you want to kind of highlight.
I'll go on that. I actually saw Bruce's question on that. I think it's a good one. You know, the question being, you know, there's been some rumblings about whether we are headed more towards a real recession and foreclosures, and with the new administration coming in to our country and what that would look like. And I have to tell you, every single economist that I work with does not see that happening. If you have to have a lot of factors to make 2008 happen again, and we literally have none of them. So when you have this little inventory and this much demand for housing and need for housing, you simply cannot have a foreclosure problem. You can have a foreclosure problem if a bunch of people lose their jobs, and unfortunately during the pandemic we did see that. However, a lot of those jobs were not people who owned homes. And so even if they did, they have equity in their homes. Typically over the last 6 years, they've had 8 to 10% a year appreciation. So when you look at the math and you look at what has to be thrown in a pot before foreclosures and a recession can happen, we don't have the ingredients for that right now. We don't have oversupply. We don't have lack of demand. We don't have crazy high interest rates. And even if they go up a little bit, a point or two even, it's still quite affordable from what it used to be. So there is nothing in the mix that talks about that happening. I have no doubt that eventually we'll see a plateauing of prices and a slowing down and a more balancing in the market, because that's what markets do. They balance themselves eventually. But we are not looking at a lot of foreclosures. It wouldn't make sense for what we have going in the pot right now.
Yeah, I agree with what Kelly said, and I think a lot of what's happening in the water market is related to real estate. Is it a healthy market? I would say no. There really aren't a lot of sellers. There are a lot more buyers than sellers, just like there is with real estate. If you're not buying something like CBT, it's complicated to develop the water that's necessary, and that may not fit in time. You know, builders want to build. They don't want to wait 3 or 4 years for water court. They don't want to, you know, and then a lot of barriers have been put up in that arena too, or in administration. So in my 40 years of doing water deals in Colorado, you know, what used to be somewhat straightforward has gotten a lot more complicated and less certain. Some of the developers that I know, they're actually looking at, okay, I'm going to go find some water, and once I have some water, then I'll figure out where I'm going to build. And it's the other way around. It used to be, gosh, this is a beautiful piece of property. Look at the views, look at the access to amenities. And now they're saying, okay, once I have some water, then I'll find some piece of property that water will work on, and then I'll start building. And so it's really changed significantly.
And I think with that, you know, it's 2:01. I think we might conclude this webinar. I want to just say thank you to those who participated. It looks like we had a good turnout today. And just a reminder, there are the handouts that Walraven and Kelly showed are available in the handouts tab at the top here. And this whole video webinar will be recorded and will be available. And I think Peter will have that if you want it. So with that, thank you so much for spending the hour with us. I know I learned things, and hopefully you did too. And so thank you again.